If the public option plan is in there, as a matter of conscience, I will not allow this bill to come to a final vote. I would vote to stop final vote on this health care reform bill. I would use the power I have as a single senator to stop a final vote.
That, of course, is independent Senator Joseph Isidora Lieberman of Connecticut, very clearly enunciating his position on the use of the filibuster this year. This year, in 2009, Joe Lieberman loves the filibuster. He calls it the power I have as a single senator. It's almost romantic. But you know, there's a funny little backstory to Senator Lieberman's current love affair with the filibuster. Once upon a time, Senator Lieberman hated the filibuster. He hated it so much that he actually co-sponsored anti-filibuster legislation with Senator Tom Harkin of Iowa. Senator Lieberman and Senator Harkin tried to kill the filibuster. According to the Hartford Courant's reporting on January 6, 1995, contemporaneous reporting, quote, "The filibuster," Lieberman said, "hurts the credibility of the entire Senate and impedes progress." He spoke of the tyranny of the minority. After the anti-filibuster measure failed by a big margin back then, Senator Lieberman decried the vote against it.
The filibuster, as wrong as it is and as unfortunate as its consequences have been because it's created gridlock, has increased the power of every individual senator. And senators are not too good at yielding individual power.
This is the same senator who now waxes poetic about using his power as a single senator to kill health reform, then waxing poetic about greedy senators being unwilling to yield their individual authority. After his and Tom Harkin's proposal to kill the filibuster failed, Senator Lieberman said at the time that he would keep fighting to kill it.
So we've laid down our mark here. We've made a first charge at the fortress of the status quo in the Senate. We didn't break through, but we're going to keep charging.
We're going to keep charging. He's going to keep charging until he stops and then starts charging in the opposite direction. But while Joe Lieberman may have spectacularly abandoned the charge against the abuse of the filibuster, the abuse of the power of one senator to bring the nation to its knees, Senator Harkin, his one-time partner on this issue, has not given it up. Harkin telling the Iowa Hawkeye newspaper that he may revisit the kill the filibuster effort that he took up 14 years ago with his old pal Joe. And instead of partner or co-sponsor or advocate, Lieberman's role in this second anti-filibuster push will be as the nation's walking, talking, filibuster-threatening evidence of what it looks like when a single senator decides to take this power to extremes. Joining us now is Steve Bennett, who writes for Washington Monthly. Steve, thanks very much for coming on the show. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
When Senators Lieberman and Harkin tried to get rid of the filibuster, the 60-vote rule, 14 years ago, it failed really badly. It only got 19 votes. If Harkin brings this back, is there any chance that it would do better now?
Well, it's a long haul. It's an uphill climb. To pass a bill takes 51 votes. To overcome a filibuster takes 60 votes. To change the Senate rules takes 67 votes. So if Harkin reintroduces the measure, it's going to be pretty difficult. That said, I think it's likely to get more than 19 votes. When it was first introduced in 1995, there were 39 cloture votes that year. Cloture votes being the votes to end filibusters. Last year there were 139. So what we're seeing is an explosion in terms of the abuse of the process. And so with that in mind, I think it's safe to assume that there'll be a slightly stronger appetite among a lot of senators to end this abuse. But it's still going to be difficult, in part because both parties have an interest in keeping it around. You know, every senator can imagine the situation in which they're in the minority and the majorities are fleeting. And so I think that even in the Democratic caucus, there's going to be a lot of people who want to keep it around because they want to be able to filibuster when they're in the minority again at some point in the future. So that dynamic creates a situation in which it's going to be pretty tough to get Harkin's bill passed, but I'm glad he's pushing it anyway because it's a worthwhile effort.
That argument, though, that everybody wants to keep it around because they might want to use it someday, made sense to me when there were 39 filibusters a year. But now that there is a standing filibuster on every piece of major legislation, as you say, when you've gone from 39 filibusters a year to 139, where essentially we've got a de facto 60-vote margin for passing anything in the Senate, it seems to me like the old bets about us wanting to reserve this power to use it when we need it are sort of off. How did we get to a place where it's being used so much more frequently? Did they change a rule about it? How did it become so easy to filibuster everything now?
That's one of the biggest frustrations, I think, for those of us who are watching this debate closely. It happened completely naturally. It was a very organic process. The rule didn't necessarily change, although at one point in the past they lowered the number necessary for the filibuster. But in general, we're looking at a situation in which it just kind of happened. Senators would occasionally filibuster in extreme circumstances. But as of, say, the last Congress, the number just exploded. We broke a record. The number of filibusters are coming at an unprecedented pace. They broke the record in the last Congress. They're on track to break their own record, and I'm referring, of course, to the Republican minority, break their own record again in this Congress. And I think that one of the problems we have is that the political establishment thinks that this is normal, that the Senate just operates this way. It doesn't. For 200 years, it didn't operate this way. If a majority of senators wanted to pass a bill, they passed a bill. That has changed slowly and surely, and I think that that's something that's gone largely overlooked as part of the larger debate.
Steve, if they are not able to kill the filibuster, if they're not able to get, as you say, 67 votes to change the Senate rules, what else could the Democratic leadership in the Senate do to pass health reform, for example, to overcome this 60-vote supermajority that has suddenly become the norm? One option I know is reconciliation, but that does really limit them in terms of what types of legislation they're able to pass under that.
Right. I think in general there are two broad approaches to this. One is the reconciliation approach, which you mentioned, and which Senator Wyden reflected on earlier. It's difficult because it has limited applicability, and there's a timeline in terms of when those bills expire and have to be reauthorized. I think the other aspect of this is public pressure. I think people have to be aware of the fact that one of the reasons there's so much gridlock and one of the reasons bills are just having so much trouble getting passed nowadays is because of this filibuster. I imagine the typical American doesn't realize that if a bill comes up in the Senate and it has 58 supporters and 42 opponents, it dies. It doesn't get passed because the 42 trumps the 58. I think that if Americans in general were more aware of this, they'd be more likely to be outraged. And the reasons that Republicans feel justified in being able to have these constant filibusters on literally everything is that they feel like there are no electoral consequences for their obstructionism. And so I think one of the things that Senate Democrats would be wise to do is shine a light on this and explain to the public one of the reasons people are frustrated with Congress not being able to get things done is because of these filibusters. And if there's more of a public backlash and there's a sense that there will be electoral consequences for this, then Republicans might be less likely to do it.
Steve Bennin of Washington Monthly, who blogs at WashingtonMonthly.com. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Steve. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rachel.